Flybys, war games and the biggest rise in tensions in 2 decades. As Russia holds its annual show of power in Moscow and NATO bolsters its borders, we ask if this is a return to the Cold War era. Also on today's program, he's nicknamed Duterte Harry for his tough approach. But will the Philippines' new president back up his words with action? And in Picture This, flying the flag, North Korea's Workers' Party Congress comes to an end with a colourful display in Pyongyang. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. For around half a century, much of the world was split ideologically and militarily between East and West as the Cold War forced nations to pick a side. The US and its allies became NATO, while the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact with 7 other countries. With the threat of all-out nuclear war, the sides never fought each other in open conflict, relying on proxies instead. In 1989, the Cold War began to thaw with the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. But in the past 2 years, tensions have been on the rise again, following Russia's annexation of Crimea. Today's Newsmaker then is NATO, as we ask whether there is a return to the Cold War days.
Tensions between Russia and NATO are running high.
We have a commitment to defend the territory of the Baltic states.
We need a 360-degree approach to deterrence and defense.
Both sides are boosting their military presence, accusing the other of provocations and threatening their security.
NATO and Russia have profound and persistent disagreements.
The Defense Ministry is taking measures aimed at countering NATO forces' growth close to the Russian borders.
By the end of the year, Russia plans to deploy 2 new military divisions along its western flank and another along its southern. Each division is expected to be made up of around 10,000 soldiers. Russia says this is in retaliation to the growing threat from NATO forces, as the alliance has responded to the Baltic states' request for more protection from Russia. NATO plans to rotate 4 battalions through eastern member states, and the US will quadruple its European defence spending to $3.4 billion in 2017. As each side continues to step up this military tit-for-tat, the risk of escalation grows, and NATO is standing firm that it is the only one retaliating.
It was not the government of Kiev that destabilized eastern Ukraine. It's been the pro-Russian separatists who are encouraged by Russia, financed by Russia, trained by Russia, supplied by Russia, and armed by Russia.
Russia's actions in Ukraine and its annexation of Crimea in 2014 raised fears of renewed expansionist ambitions, something the Kremlin categorically denies. But tensions with NATO have been steadily increasing since.
Looks like you may come across the flight deck, coming in low.
In just the last month, Russian fighter jets made simulated attack passes near a US warship in the Baltic Sea and intercepted a US reconnaissance plane flying near its border. In a show of force, US F-22 fighter jets then landed in Lithuania.
We're sending the message as a NATO member country, together with our partner, the United States of America, that we're ready to defend ourselves.
There has also been tension over Russia's military involvement in Syria and its repeated incursions into NATO member Turkey's airspace.
Russia's actions are not contributing to the security and the stability of the region. I call on Russia to fully respect NATO airspace and to avoid escalating tensions.
NATO is planning its biggest buildup of forces in the region since the Cold War. But there's some question whether its 40,000-strong rapid response force would be able to defend against Russia. And with tensions mounting, there's concern this military manoeuvring will continue. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss whether this is a return to the Cold War days is Evgeny Buzhinsky in Moscow. He's a retired Lieutenant General of the Russian Army. And in Washington, D.C. is Ambassador Kurt Volker, the former U.S. permanent representative to NATO. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Kurt Volker, let me start with you. Are we seeing a new Cold War unfolding?
Well, I know that some Russian spokesmen have said that, including at the Munich Security Conference this year. But I certainly hope not. Certainly the United States and Europe don't want to be in a Cold War. We're not looking at Russia with any kind of aggressive intentions. But we are concerned about what we see Russia doing, whether it is the military exercises, the military buildup, the provocative actions against NATO territory and NATO forces, such as the U.S. destroyers, or the invasions and pressure on neighboring countries. So it's all very worrying, but we're hoping that we avoid getting into that kind of scenario again.
Evgeny Buzhinsky, they're concerned about what you're doing. Is Russia concerned about what NATO is doing?
Well, of course, Russia is concerned about NATO actions, but I personally see the present state of affairs, practically very expectable and normal. You see, in my opinion, for at least 20 years, NATO has been desperately searching for a real job, for a justification of its existence. Because you see, Afghanistan operation or fight against pirates in Somali waters are a bit artificial for NATO, not typical tasks for NATO. Now the real job is here to deter aggressive Russia. So it's just a good justification for budget increase, for more deployment of troops. So it's all right.
Okay, NATO's only reason for existing is to perpetuate its existence because it doesn't have a proper reason after the end of the Cold War. Kurt Volker, what do you think?
Well, I don't think that's a correct reading of what NATO's about and what NATO has been doing for the last several years. NATO, first and foremost, has always been about the defense of its members, that these are free countries, democratic countries that want to be secure, and particularly some of those in Central and Eastern Europe. They have very sharp recollections of the past when they were occupied by Soviet forces or incorporated into the Soviet Union in the case of the Baltic states. So they don't want that to happen again, and they're very concerned about their security, so they wanted to join NATO for that purpose. Now, the reality is that Russia was not threatening these countries, and so the Western Europeans, the United States, didn't see a need to increase significantly any kind of defense capabilities as a result of their joining NATO. In fact, NATO's defense capabilities and defense spending has gone down dramatically over the last 20 to 25 years, to the point the U.S. is always complaining about it. What's happened more recently is that we've seen that some things do affect the security of NATO allies, even if they happen far away. And the Somali piracy operation is a good example where Western ships, both cruise ships as well as commercial shipping, were being attacked, and this was an opportunity to protect some of those ships. But more recently, we've seen NATO reverse some of the trend about deployments and some of the trend about force reductions because of the increased military expenditure and growth and preparations on Russia, as well as the use of Russia's military. But the fundamental is still all the same. It's about the defense and security of members of NATO for the security of all.
Okay, Kurt Volker, I wanna talk Ukraine in a moment, but first let me bring up Syria and global terror. Vladimir Putin at the Victory Day parade said the West and NATO, he didn't say it directly, but he sort of alluded to it, the West and NATO have unacceptable double standards on global terror, and he wants a global terror plan basically on his terms. Do you believe, Kurt, that President Obama and other Western leaders should be hearing him out on his plans for global terror and his plans in solving a conflict like Syria?
Yeah. Well, listen, it's always important to listen to what other leaders have to say. All of our societies have been victims of terrorism, and we all care about terrorism and protecting our societies. We've seen that in Moscow, we've seen that in Paris, we've seen it in Brussels, we've seen it in Washington and New York. So we should be talking. Let's be clear about that. We should be talking. That being said, how we go about this, yes, there are significant differences between what Russia wants to do and what the United States and others have tried to do. We view, in the case of Syria, Bashar Assad and his regime as a major part of the problem, that by killing civilians, cracking down on the local population, trying to impose control after there have already been protests in the country, this sparked an armed rebellion against the government. The more that Russia and Iran and Hezbollah support the Assad regime, the more it drives people to arms to fight against the regime. It's perpetuating the problem. That's the U.S. perspective. Russia's perspective is quite different, seeing Assad as the solution to the problem. I think we agree on wanting to fight ISIS, however, and hopefully we can continue to talk about how to do that.
Evgeny Buzhinsky, do you think that NATO, led by the United States, is riddled with contradictions and double standards when it comes to terror and Syria?
Well, of course, there are double standards. You see, of course, we have different position on Syria. We are not defending, I mean, Russia is not defending Bashar Assad personally. We are defending state institutions. We do not want to the repetition of Libya scenario when the state institution collapsed and the country actually was and is in a state of chaos. As for the double standards, you see, of course, the West is very concentrated on the Assad regime, that Russia is protecting the Assad regime. I repeat, we are protecting state institution and want Syria to remain a secular and stable state. But you see about double standards. For example, al-Nusra Front, it's the Syrian division of Al-Qaeda. It's absolute nonsense, in our opinion, that Al-Qaeda is considered to be a terrorist organization on the territory of the United States and moderate opposition in the territory of Syria. Thanks God that recently United States changed its position as regards al-Nusra, but there are numerous other, the so-called moderate opposition groups, which are very closely working with Daesh and other terrorist and radical organizations.
Okay, let me move on to Ukraine. Kurt Volker, would you agree that Russia has basically won if you think about the fact that they've annexed Crimea, they've essentially ensured control of large parts of eastern Ukraine, that's all pro-Kremlin, and nobody's doing anything about it. Sanctions are not really hurting Russia. You'd have to go to war with Putin in order to get back everything that was lost in Ukraine. Would you then agree that Russia has won and NATO can do nothing when it comes to Ukraine?
Well, first off, let's start with Ukraine. This is about the Ukrainian people and their ability for self-determination, their ability to have a sovereign country. The United States and Russia, the UK and France promised in 1994 to guarantee Ukraine's territorial integrity and its sovereignty. Russia's violated that by annexing Crimea and by arming and supporting these opposition groups and occupying parts of Ukrainian territory now. That being said, the Ukrainians are still determined to regain the sovereignty over their own territory. The government in Kyiv is trying to strengthen its capabilities politically, economically, and in terms of security. And I think it's going to play out over a long period of time. You're right that no one in the United States or Western Europe wants to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. At the same time, we can't accept that Russia can invade its neighbors and occupy and annex territory at will. That's a return to some of the darkest days that Europe saw in the last century, and we don't want to go back there. We do need to respect the rights of the Ukrainian people to have and support their own country and their own sovereignty.
Evgeny Buzhinsky, why doesn't Russia respect the rights and the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people? Why don't you give back the Crimean Peninsula?
First of all, of course we can discuss Budapest Memorandum. It will take another hour, but I would say that Russia has no obligations as regards the government which toppled the legitimate president as a result of the state coup. And as for reunification of Russia and Crimea, that was the definite will of the Crimean people. You may hold any referendum now, 85% of the population of Crimea will be for reunification with Russia. As for Donbass, Russia is one of the most interested parties for settlement of that part of the crisis. But the matter is that Kyiv is not fulfilling its part of obligations, I mean the political part. And the most important is the amnesty for those people who are fighting for their rights in Donbass. We had this experience in Chechnya. unless and until Kyiv is ready to adopt a law with the ultimate amnesty to everybody in Donbass, nothing will happen in the process of settlement of the crisis.
Okay, we are running out of time, so I want to get both of your thoughts on the next U.S. president. Potentially, at the moment, it's probably going to be either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, barring some major surprise or pivot in some major direction. Let me start with you, Mr. Buzhinsky. Hillary Clinton seems to be a fan of the international institutions that the United States is a part of, like NATO. Donald Trump has shown indifference to NATO and has even suggested pulling out of it. With all of that in mind, I guess the Russian preference would be a Trump presidency because he hands the entire region to you guys on a platter, doesn't he?
Well, you see, my personal experience tells me that it's the declarations of the candidate and the president may be very different. So I'm not going to guess who will be the next president, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. But let's live and see what the policy of the United States will be. There may be some changes, but I don't think they will be radical.
Sitting on the fence, Kurt Volker, would a Donald Trump presidency, if we take him at his word vis-a-vis NATO, would that be a disaster or an opportunity? I'm assuming you're going to say disaster.
No, what I'm going to say is certainly what he has said to this point has given great alarm to our allies. They hear about doing deals with Russia over their heads, viewing Putin as a strong man, and that makes our allies quite worried. It reminds them of Yalta, where people are making decisions about their territory and their sovereignty over their heads. That being said, there's no indication that we have about what Donald Trump would actually do if elected president. I think he's saying a lot of things, sometimes contradictory things, just to appeal to people's emotions and get elected. It's not a clear indication of where U.S. policy is going to go. The real difference in this election is Hillary Clinton is an insider and very traditional in U.S. foreign policy. Donald Trump's an outsider and promising to shake things up. That's all we know.
Okay, Kurt Volker, Evgeny Buzhinsky, gentlemen, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. It's been thought-provoking. Thank you very much. Still to come on the Newsmakers, the Punisher gets ready to take power in the Philippines. And in Picture This, Chairman Kim celebrates a rare promotion as the Workers' Party Congress ends in Pyongyang. Hardline anti-crime candidate Rodrigo Duterte has claimed victory in the Philippines presidential race. Nicknamed the Punisher, he has a controversial past, with allegations of involvement in extrajudicial killings during his time as mayor of Davao. But his supporters say he's a man of the people who can clamp down on crime. The Newsmakers' Duncan Crawford reports.
He's the former state prosecutor who's vowed to crush crime and corruption. Dubbed the Punisher, he is shocked but also won votes for his promise to kill those who break the law.
If they fight back with violent resistance, kill them all.
Rodrigo Duterte has polarized opinion, but is the new president of the Philippines. Known for outrageous statements, including joking about raping women, his critics say he will bring terror to the country.
It has become the symbol of frustration, maybe even desperation.
I'm worried you will declare martial law, and it's not democracy anymore.
But the outpouring of support for Duterte is clear. In a country fearful of rising crime, the people have backed him.
Mr. President!
To his supporters, Rodrigo Duterte is more than a president. He is a saviour. The 71-year-old has promised to bring back capital punishment and introduce public executions, and warns that the corrupt face a simple choice.
The corrupt policemen anywhere, they have two options: to retire or maybe to die.
Voters have lapped up his outspoken style, and his record as mayor in the country's third biggest city, Davao, is a big sell. It used to be the murder capital of the Philippines, but not anymore, and Duterte's got the credit. His critics, though, warn his tough guy policies are dangerous.
It would be naive to even consider this as just campaign drama, because he has done it in the past.
And past policies have led to great pain. In a slum in Davao, Clarita remembers her children. She says her 4 teenage sons were killed by vigilante squads and blames Duterte.
There are people who like him, but even the people here who are witnesses won't do anything. And there are several witnesses.
As mayor, Duterte has been accused of supporting suspected death squads, something he doesn't always deny. He's repeatedly backed killing to stop crime.
Are there any funeral parlours around here? Now's the best time to set one up. I'll supply the dead bodies.
The promise to kill, to restore peace and order, inspired millions to vote for him. And the man who says things others consider unmentionable is now president. But others warn it could lead to a dictatorship. Duncan Crawford, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss the Philippines' controversial new leader is Raquel Reyes. She's a research fellow at SOAS University of London and a columnist at the Manila Times. She joins me from Amsterdam. Thanks a lot for joining us. The Punisher doesn't sound like a man who's up for much compromise. What was the secret to his success in getting voted in, and why did Filipinos want this right now?
He has charisma and personality. I've watched him several times in his debates and in interviews, and as he relates to the crowd, he moves with swagger and bravado, and he exudes confidence, and that inspires confidence among his supporters.
Might he need to be a bit more careful when he assumes office on foreign policy? Because what he said on foreign policy has seemed to be quite Trumpian as well. He wants to plant the Filipino flag on the disputed islands in the South China Sea. How's that going to go down with regional powers like China? They're not going to let him get away with that, are they?
He simply said he would just jet ski onto one of the islands, plant the Philippine flag, and if he fails, either the Chinese will kill him or the Filipinos will kill him. So it is very hard to take that sort of comment seriously. It is anyone's guess actually what he will do. What we do know, and it's on record, is that he has no qualms in telling our allies, whether it's Australia, whether it's the US, to shut up and butt out of Philippine politics.
What a guy, Rodrigo Duterte. We will undoubtedly be following his career very, very closely. Raquel Reyes, thank you very much for providing us with some deeper insight. In today's Picture This, thousands of ecstatic North Koreans have held a rally to celebrate the end of the country's first Workers' Party Congress in 36 years. Let's take a look.
실현하기 위하여 적극 노력할 것입니다. 온 세계 우리 공화국의 의미는 핵보유.
Today's newsmaker has been NATO, as we asked whether the freeze in relations with Russia represented a return to the Cold War. The current build-up on the borders, the rhetoric and the posturing all appear to point that way. The last 2 years have seen two of the most direct confrontations between the two sides. The takeover of Crimea and Turkey's shooting down of a Russian jet after it violated its airspace have soured relations. And while the ideology of the Cold War may have changed, the mutual enmity and the battle for supremacy goes on. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. As always, thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.